Thank you to you early arrivers that have jumped in already. We will start the presentation on warehouse labor best practices shortly. In the meantime, you can see that you've got a chat box on your panel there. Should be lower to the bottom. This is going to be where you can submit questions throughout the presentation here. We will have a Q&A session at the end that we will be addressing these questions. And in the meantime, if you like, you can type in here at least one thing that you're hoping to get out of today's session. All right, as we have attendees continue to stream in here, we'll give it a couple of more minutes here. In the meantime, if you haven't already in the chat panel, please go ahead and type something that you're hoping to learn today. I'd be happy to shout out to make sure our speakers can get it covered. And then throughout the presentation, go ahead and put your questions there. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. We will address those. And to sweeten the pot, we will offer 5 Google Play gift cards to those that are participating via entering questions or things that you're hoping to learn in that chat box. Thank you. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Thank you so much to all that have joined so far. MCAT and Barcodes Inc. take great pride in being a trusted partner to our customers and our stakeholders. Day-to-day, that means recommending and supporting the right solutions. It also means leveraging our expertise and the expertise of our partners. And today we have 3 great ones joined to provide some very comprehensive insight on a topic I know is close to home for all of you. Warehouse labor best practices. In all of our meetings that we do with DCs, there's some very deep-rooted challenges that surface in each of them, and many of them are rooted in employee and recruitment employee recruitment and retention challenges. To speak to these challenges, we will hear from Kevin Ledversis of Newcastle Systems, Brian Devine of Pro Logistics, and up first, we will hear from Mike Maris, Director of Supply Chain Solutions at Zebra Technologies. Mike is one of the global logistic industry's most respected technologists and in-demand business consultants. His insights and strategies are currently helping forward-looking organizations of all size transform their businesses by deploying creative, sustainable new technology solutions that solve some of the thorniest issues facing many of today's successful organizations. So thank you and welcome, Mike.
All right, thanks very much. Let's go ahead and jump in, and once you give me control here, we'll take it from there. Let's talk about fulfillment in the warehouse. Some of the major areas that we're seeing is really around the growth of the e-fulfillment systems. Obviously, Amazon, Walmart.com are causing a major change in the way that we're doing distribution today, which in the end of it is making a lot of changes in the operation, particularly around automation, around the technologies. Primarily, we're seeing about different kinds of wearable computers where it makes it easier for the employee to do their job better. And then lastly, optimization, knowing where people are at, how they're doing it, and being able to optimize people within the building are very critical. So what we're seeing is there's short-term investments right now taking place to combat what we've typically seen as this e-commerce facilities have really decided to roll out, and what we would call maybe the Amazon effect. And then also then a long-term strategy on what we're going to do to be able to meet the needs of the future. Now, one of the things that we do at Zebra is every year we do an annual survey, and that survey allows us to go through and ask not only our customers, but also other people within the business questions about what they're seeing today and what they see in the future. So some of the things that we're seeing as far as trends today are, some of the easy ones are like, I need to have faster delivery, I need to have a better labor efficiency in my facilities, and what kind of new technology should I use in order to be able to be competitive. What I think is really key though here is what we see below the plans and where they're going in the future. And that's really about how do they combine automation with the use of other technologies within the facility. And then lastly, as we look out even further, most of our customers are looking at a complete turnover to automation where you have little or no involvement. And we see that happening now in many of the larger customers that we have within Zebra. So the rising demand of users bring on a whole new set of challenges. And those challenges typically deal around technology, labor, capacity, data, and more importantly, visibility. As we've all gotten accustomed to having a FedEx or UPS or an Amazon deliver to us, as soon as we place our order, we can see where it is in the order cycle. We know when it's out on the road, and most of the time we get a notification when it's being delivered. And for those folks that have a doorbell system where they can actually see the delivery, they can actually see what's happening in real time. So it's really key that most of the operations that we're talking to are looking to make this whole process very seamless. So in order to be able to do that, to eliminate these supply chain interruptions, they're looking at where do they need to make expansion of their facilities, and then what is it going to take to make those facilities run. So some very key points there for these warehouses or fulfillment centers going forward. Now here's, we're going to get into some of the questions that we see of the customers and how that affects what is taking place with the labor within our facilities. Now, here the question is what are your organization's biggest operational challenges now, and what do you expect in the next 5 years? So 61% of those organizations, obviously, they anticipate a lot of technology changes, and it's very important for not only the operations folks, but for the IT folks to be very much in line to be able to manage for that challenge. And then followed by 6% of the labor for recruitment and or efficiencies in that area. And what I've done here is I've broken it down into the different areas where you can see between the countries so that you get a better feel for this is just not isolated to North America. It is something that we're seeing globally as well. One of the key areas that we're finding that technology is playing a big role is in the area of inbound receiving. And so we asked the question, how long does it take to train new staff to fully come up to speed on bringing products in, putting them away, slotting them, those kind of things? And I think what we're finding here is rather astounding in that it takes on average over 4.5 weeks for a worker to get up to full productivity. So that kind of begs the question, what do you do in order to be able to move that person from being very unaware of what they're doing within the facility to being a good, productive worker who can make a lot of impact on your operation? And a lot of what we're seeing today is around the technology that they're given, especially when you start going from the what has been common in the past, the old green screen, into the GUI interface that most all of us now are interested or used to on our phone, and especially for the younger people coming into the workforce, having a GUI interface, and particularly with an Android interface, is making it very easy for them to pick up and understand their job and do it professionally. And then when we look at outbound, similar question is, how long does it take to get that individual up to full productivity? And again, some of the technologies that have worked here to help out on this in trying to reduce that 4.5 to 5 weeks to get up to full productivity is around voice, is around wearable computers, is around robotics. So we're seeing a big push not only on the inbound, but also on the outbound. How do I get this thing in and out quicker? As well as we're seeing a lot more facilities trying to minimize the amount of time that inventory is within the warehouse by cross-docking and eliminating that extra handling that would go along with the normal picking process. So as we look out a little bit further, when we look at what's the really the union between the newer technologies and the frontline workers. So let's talk about that a second. So when we look at this, we realize that automation is going to be out there, and especially in the near future, it's going to continue to be very prevalent in what we would call our larger top tier companies. But I think what you're going to find is that in the mid to lower tier companies who are doing e-commerce fulfillment, that they're still going to need to have some reasonable amount of technology to help them through that. Not everybody's going to be able to acquire facilities that are light out. Not everybody's going to be able to acquire robots, which would help them in their business. But what we're seeing is there is a middle of the road which will help both the smaller companies achieve their maximum efficiencies as well as large companies both. And I think we need to explore that here a little bit further. So another one of the questions that we've asked in our study was, think about your operational processes. What's the most optimal balance of automation and or human labor? And this was really a hard question for most people to think about, because automation has been in sort of the background, but very, very quickly coming to the forefront. So as you can see, partial augmentation and automation is now growing between the two of them. 73% of our respondents responded positively to this. So when you start thinking about what does that do for you, it's certainly going to make a big difference on how you're looking to plan out in the next 5 years, what's going to take place in your operations. When we ask the question, what's your organization's most important labor initiative? It was interesting to note that from now and through 2024, and we usually try to look out about 5 years, 86% of those people plan to increase their technical and supply chain training to retrain labor. And that's to get more working those folks with automation and with some of the new technology toys and devices that we use within the company. So we see a big effort towards the optimizing the use of technology for what we see in the area of temporary labor. When we start talking about large package delivery companies, when we talk about large e-commerce companies, the things that we're seeing that create a lot of headaches for them is how do they bring on temporary staff? How do they introduce them to technology? And how do they get them productive in a very, very short period of time? And again, we've seen that through the Android GUI interface that we're seeing on our equipment, as well as the use of some automation, which make it very easy to understand what's taking place. So the last one on that was the training labor. How do you do it to reduce time and expense, especially for employees who might be working outside of the four walls, say doing deliveries? And again, it's having good training on these devices that can provide the information they need at the time that they're actually doing their delivery. So very critical as far as the type of technology being used. And then we asked the question, to what extent do you agree or disagree with these statements? And what we found that the warehouse environment will be considered more desirable career path, and also implementing warehouse technologies and devices would help attract and retain workers. Again, we're seeing 70 to 80% response positively that we've got to look at what kind of new jobs can keep people into this supply chain fulfillment business. So, you know, over 3/4 of these organizations believe that they can provide a career path. And when we start thinking about career path, what does that really entail? We're seeing that jobs around programming, especially now that the younger generations coming into the business are learning more programming rules, easier programming languages coming into the business. There's a lot around data analytics and understanding how data analytics can actually help the operations in a very quick and I guess you would say probably very beneficial method. And then lastly, the use around robotics and how robotics is changing the world for all of us. So let me summarize here. The path to supply modernization, it really requires a lot of thought about how you want to do this in your building. Obviously, the labor issue is a very big part of that. But first of all, you got to think about, are my facilities able to accommodate what's changing in the marketplace? I've had a couple of 3 large companies which have taken their fulfillment centers, large warehouses, and actually dedicate a third or a fourth of their area within the warehouse to managing their new e-commerce business. Pretty critical there. The use of warehouse control and execution systems, where they're actually looking at not only just what's being picked, what's being received, but the labor aspect of that, the shipping aspect of that. So those systems are all becoming very beneficial to overall health of productivity in the warehouses. And then obviously we're trying to help companies and their employees work smarter and not harder. And that's giving them the tools to be able to do that, so they don't have to look for things. That product in some cases is brought to them. They don't have to go to that product wherever it's located in a warehouse. And then lastly, in the 5 years, what we're seeing is a big change in the pendulum as far as visibility. Everybody talks about visibility in real time, but essentially, if you think about what it does, it gives the customer the kind of service that you and I enjoy from our local delivery from FedEx or UPS. It's knowing where my product is in the picking process, where it's headed, and when will it get to me. So those are all very critical to it. And then lastly, we talk about just a quick overview on the products that Zebra provides. And certainly we have the largest portfolio of products for the e-fulfillment centers. And what we're seeing on that is obviously everything from the handhelds to fork-mounted computers, tablets, and of course the Zebra printers. And in addition to that, we offer a full line supply of services and products such as printer labels, so on and so forth, to help really make a complete warehouse as efficient as possible. So with that, I'll turn that back over, and I appreciate you listening.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I find it fascinating to see that while technology can be, and the onboarding of that technology can be seen as a challenge, that it's also absolutely a tool in both the recruitment and retention. So thank you for that.
Yep.
Fascinating stuff.
Yep, big part of it.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
So a reminder to all that you can continue to submit questions through the chat box. Thank you to all that have. Our next speaker has over 20 years of experience within the data capture industry, helping customers identify where and how process improvements can be made in the warehouse. Please welcome Kevin Ledversis with Newcastle Systems.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks to Mike for highlighting some of the technology trends coming in our space. And today I just want to talk about, again, this is all about people today. I'll focus on the process and the people part as well as technology, how it all rolls in. But if you're managing people right now in this space, I know there are some people on here today that are struggling with these challenges that have repeated themselves now for several years. Unfortunately, budgets are not really increasing at the pace that a lot of companies are growing. So robotics and automation are fantastic. But for a lot of companies, the average DC budget's about $200,000, and it's simply not affordable. So you're under the same pressures, mainly because of the Amazon effect, or your competitors are getting really good at getting product in and out. Capacity constraints, I hear this all the time. It's like we just don't have enough space, or we can't get things in and out fast enough. And then SKU counts are rising just because customer service levels are really important, especially to senior managers. You don't want to not have something for your customers, so purchasing has no problem adding items, which creates stress for you guys. You have to go out and figure out where to put it, where to store it, how to store it, and it creates a lot of pressure. Buying patterns are changing, ordering patterns, a lot of eaches. Single line items creates a lot of stress, especially for picking operations. That's just the nature of the world we live in. People buy single line items all the time. And cost centers versus profit centers, I think going forward, senior managers are going to have to start looking at the distribution space as a way to make it an advantage. If you're looked at as a cost center, which some of you are, it's difficult to get money in technology and training, which is sad because you can create a lot of waste, which I'll talk about soon. And last but not least, labor. This is all about labor. It is really difficult to find people, and I've been in different places in the country where unemployment is so low, and Brian will talk to that in a second, that you literally can't get a body. And it's really difficult to achieve your goals if you can't get people. So we advocate people and process to make things better. If you look at some of the metrics, this comes out from the Warehouse Education Resource Council. This is a great survey they do every year. It's very interesting to see the trends. If you look at number one, it's capacity. Again, as I mentioned, people are struggling with where to put things and how much space they need. So in the last couple of years, it's pretty much stayed at the top, followed by picking accuracy. Picking accuracy is critical, and this is really one place where technology has a huge role in the accuracy standpoint, from scanning parts and putting them in boxes correctly. And then, but as you look at the people part of this whole equation, number 4, number 6, number 7, number 8, in the last 2 years, those metrics have really, really gone up in the ranks because, let's face it, people are becoming a really important commodity. In fact, if you can't get people, it's impossible to survive. So if you're looking at your contract employees to total workforce, how much overtime you're running, what your part-time workforce percentage is, it is becoming much more important to people. So the way we treat people and retain them is going to be a competitive advantage for some of you going forward. And, just some rough statistics. I don't know what the actual number is, but there's a ton of openings. Anywhere in the country where there's heavy warehousing, like the Inland Empire in California, Chicago, Atlanta, New Jersey, Texas, there's signs all over the place looking for hourly workers. Yet it's really difficult to retain people. And unfortunately, the turnover can be as high as 50, 60, 70, 100%, depending on how well they're treated, how well they are used, and if they feel motivated. The average age is increasing. Millennials, as a general rule, are not really gravitating to this space as boomers are leaving the industry. And so that average age is increasing. It's physically demanding work at times, which makes it really difficult. And the hourly rates are still sort of on the lower side, even though it's becoming a critical part of our economy. In fact, the warehousing and distribution is now 12% of our gross domestic product. And I read recently, within 2 years, those jobs are going to overtake healthcare. So it's a huge industry. It's a great industry to be involved in, but I think we've got to do a much better job taking care of our people. And so when I'm out in the field, and this is all based on lean management, Toyota Production System principles. This is the things I've witnessed and I've learned over the years as to why certain companies struggle and why other companies, such as an Amazon, are doing really, really well. And some of these things are really basic, and we won't get into the detail too much, but feel free to reach out if you have questions. First and foremost, they have a poor layout. And the layout is, most people have a square, and they can go vertically or they can go horizontally. But how they use that space dictates the flow of product in, out the door. So if it's not laid out properly, you create a lot of problems. Poor storage methods. Go to Modex or go to ProMat if you can. Just see what's the latest and greatest. And a lot of times it's just different racking. But a lot of times people don't store product efficiently, and so they say they don't have enough capacity, which in many cases is not true. SKU analysis, well, let's face it, if you have 100 items, realistically, 20 of those give you 80% of your sales. And so if you don't analyze those, oftentimes we see people putting product really far away from the shipping area when in fact they should be much closer. So if you don't know what your high movers are, it's difficult to plan where those parts should be. No accuracy. Believe it or not, 30% of companies are still not barcoding in the warehouse space. So they're using paper, they're using manual systems, and so the accuracies are quite bad. They have a lot of misshipped products, a lot of mispicks, a lot of returns. Creates a lot of stress for them. They have no standard processes. So if you have 10 people receiving trucks and each and every one of those workers are doing it differently, you're going to have a lot of variance. So standard processes are really important. Poor flow, you can often see this on the receiving docks. If you have a lot of pallets sitting out there for days on end, typically the flow of your business is not nearly as good as it should be. Nothing is visual. This is a simple tool, just making things visible. Good companies have KPIs and metrics, and everybody knows the score. So if your job is to receive trucks, you know exactly what's coming in and when, and you can plan for that with labor. And the last but not least, a really inexpensive way to get productivity is engaging your people. So if you're not engaging your staff and you're doing some of these other things, it's very possible you're struggling. And so thinking of work really just two ways. Is your product going closer to your customer, or is it not moving? If you can think of those two examples of having either value-added work or non-value-added work, I think you'll find that you can analyze your people and get more out of them just by not wasting their time. So if you haven't had lean training, maybe, Steve, you can do a poll who's had formal lean training if they use it. This is a great way to think about work in general. Either it's good or bad work. And if it's not moving closer to your customer, then you're probably stuck and you have a bottleneck you need to fix. 3 deadly sins. This is something I learned from Toyota. Jason Mangini's now at Kenco. Todd has really simplified this. It's in the warehouse space. There are 3 sins that you really got to focus on. It's walking, motion, it's picking paths that are bad. It's people walking back and forth to get things. It's excessive. And in fact, in some cases, warehouse workers are walking, could be as much as 10 miles a day. So when you can't get people and the average age is increasing, that's a big problem. Touches or handling, if you're handling product a lot of times because you don't have great layouts or you don't have good storage methods, things are on the floor that need to be up in racks and you're touching it multiple times, it affects your margins, especially if you're dealing with low margin items. You cannot afford to be touching these things multiple times. And last but not least, paperwork. There are a lot of people out there still using printed paper pick tickets. And it's very wasteful, and it's really not the most accurate way to pick items. And so those 3 things, if you can focus on those, I think you'll be much better off going forward. And just an example of motion, I see this a lot in the receiving docks, big spaces. And the workers just don't have the tools they need. So what they're doing is they're going to the pallet, they're walking to an office or a fixed station, back and forth, entering data, looking up data, printing labels, printing forms, and they do that process so many times per day. It often has a huge effect on the productivity. We've seen as much as 4 hours wasted just walking on the receiving docks. So that's a great place to start. I can tell you Toyota typically starts in the shipping zones because they want to get closer to their customers. But look at your shipping areas and look at your receiving areas for motion, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit to be had there. So getting into the lean companies, guys who do things really well, Amazon would be an example, world-class companies. 5S just means organization. They have everything they need, where they need it, and when they need it, and there's no excessive stuff on the floor. If they need a broom, they know exactly where to find it. They have a great handle on their inventory patterns, and so they have high-velocity pick zones for their most, the items that are selling the most. They value stream out their process, meaning they really own their process, and they use their employees to help them with that, so they can identify waste and remove it. They're really good at leveling loads. You don't see stacks of items sitting all over the place. There's a much better flow throughout the building. And even in a simple thing like receiving schedules, we've seen companies that don't have schedules, formal schedules. So they have 5, 10, 15 trucks show up within an hour, and it just creates a lot of stress. They can't process that much that fast. They do have standardized work. In other words, there's one right way to do something. They use one-piece flow, meaning, one thing at a time. They're not doing batch work. They really are good at visual signage. Everybody knows the score. They know what their KPIs are, and everybody's in harmony with the way the goals of the company are driven. And last but not least, they're excellent at engagement, or Kaizen, a Japanese term for continuous improvement. They have a culture of doing better, and they know their people are the best source for answers, and so that's who they engage. So engagement is, sadly, in a lot of companies, only a third of people feel engaged. So if you're managing people and they don't know you, and you don't seem interested in their story, with this labor rate being such a problem, don't be surprised if they leave. And they will leave for a simple reason that people don't care about me. But when you do care about them, just by going out there and engaging them on a daily basis, absenteeism drops, safety gets much better, much less defects, especially, shipping and receiving. It's critical to label products accurately. And if people aren't motivated, then you can have a lot of problems. Productivity goes way up and profit goes way up. So a real low-cost way to get productivity is just engage your staff. Some of the performance characteristics you guys can look at, I won't go through these, but if you look at the major opportunity, these are companies that are struggling. And if at a minimum you could try to work yourself to the right, best in class is difficult. You look at stock-to-stock receiving times of less than 2 hours. That's impressive. But there are people out there with items sitting on their docks for days on end. And so over a period of time, if you start to get more interested in process improvement and technology, make sure it's working you towards the right, and at a minimum, try to get to that median average so you can compete better. The matrix that I use, or performance that I learned from industrial engineering, it's really simple. There are only 3 factors that you can do to help your worker get better. It's one, it's methods. It's how well you understand your process and how well they are standardized on that method. If it's the best process possible, then you're doing quite well. The pace, how fast they work, a lot of that's dictated through engagement and how well they are motivated to work, maybe incentives. But if they're not motivated, they're certainly not going to give you their all. And then last but not least, utilization. And that's where the motion comes into effect a lot. If you're walking 4 to 5 hours a day, you cannot be doing any value-added work. And so those are the 3 components that make up the best way to get your workers efficient. Last but not least, what we do is we make mobile-powered workstations. Just think of a way to take Mike and Zebra's products and put them on wheels to make workers much more efficient by eliminating motion. You can get double productivity, especially in receiving, and a lot less errors just by taking away that motion that exists. And we see it anywhere in the range of 1 to 4 hours a day in most companies. Well, that's all I have to say. Appreciate everybody's time. Turn it back to you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that Newcastle Systems mobile workstations weren't game changers, because they absolutely are. So if this is something that you have not considered in your warehouse, please do, and MCAT would be happy to facilitate that conversation. So last and certainly not least, our keynote speaker is a 24-year veteran of the staffing industry and has over 2 decades focused on helping his clients secure logistics talent. He is a recognized leader on labor topics for the industrial sectors, and he speaks at regional and national conferences each year. MCAT and Barcodes Inc. is thrilled to present you Brian Devine, Senior Vice President of ProLogistics. Welcome, Brian.
Well, thanks a ton. I appreciate everyone being here this morning. It's a great opportunity, so thank you guys for attending. Mike and Kevin, great work on the. Let's see. So.
Hey, Brian, we're not hearing you at the moment.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Let me advance the slide. Okay, there we go. We do an annual survey. We call it the Voice of the Blue Collar Worker, and it's a survey that we've done for since 2007. And so I'm going to cover a couple of things from that survey. We're going to talk very briefly about some of the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, information that's available. The BLS comes out the first Friday of every single month with their jobs report. And it identifies how many jobs were created the prior month. It also identifies what the current unemployment rate is. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of those important reports. We'll cover a few of the results of our employee survey. And then we have some recommendations about ways that you can attract and retain the best workers in the country. So let's talk first about the supply chain, the BLS numbers. And so the most common number that we all know is the national unemployment rate. And you can see back in September, the national unemployment rate dropped all the way to 3.5%. You can see this precipitous drop from actually the Great Recession. It got up to about 10% unemployment rate. And many of us know people that were impacted during the Great Recession. They either lost a job themselves, or a spouse lost a job, or a neighbor lost a job. To put that in perspective, there were 8 million jobs lost during the Great Recession. And we're going to come back to that in a couple of minutes. But we've made up not only those 8 million jobs, but double that on top. I'm going to bring your attention to the call out on the bottom right-hand side. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, says when the unemployment rate drops all the way down to 4.6%, they consider that full employment in the country. Of course, we're significantly below that right now. So we are well below what the CBO refers to as full employment. And once again, we're at 3.5%. Next Friday, we'll have the previous months, the October numbers. Now, I happen not to be a big fan of percentages. So I want to create an image for you of what exactly does 3.5 or even 4% unemployment, what does that mean? So the image on the slide right now in front of you is it's 100 people. And that represents the labor market. So at 3.5% unemployment, I want you to remove the best 96 workers. And basically, if you're trying to fill your jobs with through the unemployed ranks, the 4 remaining people, the 3.5 remaining people left in that room are the unemployed folks. And I hate to, you've all heard that adage, they're unemployed for a reason. And of course, that doesn't apply to every single one of those people, but it sure does apply to a good number of them. So we're going to talk about how we can best attract people when we get into the recommendations portion. So here's an interesting number for you. The BLS also tracks the number of open jobs in the country and it compares that to the number of unemployed people. You'll see the call out there that there are 7.2 million open jobs right now, and there are 5.8 million people there's less than one unemployed person for every open job. You can see just a few years ago, there were 4 or 5 people available for every single open job. Now there's less than one. And I want to point something out. That's not one qualified person. That's one person. And so, and that's one of the challenge, clearly one of the challenges that we have. So the next slide that you'll see is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, once we reach 16 years old, they put all of us into one of 3 categories. You're either employed, which is pretty understandable, you have a job. You're unemployed, meaning that you're not working, but you're actively seeking employment. And then there's this third category of the number of people who are not in the labor force. So if you're 16 years old and not working, you're included in this number. You can see just about 10 years ago, there were 80 million people sitting on the sidelines, not working. Now that grew by 16 million people in just the last 10 years. You'll remember that earlier I mentioned that there were 8 million jobs lost during the recession. And now there's 16 more million people sitting on the sidelines, not working. Now the vast majority of these people, half of them, are over 65 years old. And so we can't expect them to come back into the labor force. But there are half of these people that we can tap into for work. It's my opinion that this huge increase in people not working is terrible for our country, because when you're not employed, you're not contributing to the Social Security Fund, you're not contributing to the state workers' comp fund or the state and federal unemployment insurance fund. You might be the recipient of some of those monies, but you're not contributing to them. So when we get into our recommendations, we're going to talk a lot about what can we do to pull many of these people off of their couch and back into the workforce. So the U.S. population is made up, you can see this, that there's 153 million of us who are working. And there you can see that that's represented by that orange bar. That blue bar represents the number of people who are unemployed. And the big gray bar, you can see, are the people who are not in the labor force. And we're going to come back to that in just a couple of minutes. So one of the things I'd like to do is share this with companies. We like to track pay rates, and we compare that to the Consumer Price Index. And to put the blue line is the Consumer Price Index. The red line is the average pay rate for Prologistics since 2002. To put this in perspective, the Consumer Price Index you have to think of it as a basket of goods, and it gets readjusted every few decades. In 1984, the Consumer Price Index was 100. So think about stuff that you could buy for $100 back in 1984. It's food and clothing and gas and utilities and all the stuff that you need to live. If you bought that same basket of goods in 2002, it would cost you $181. If you bought those same basket of goods today, it would be $256. So there's been steady increases in the Consumer Price Index. Economists might not refer to that as specifically the cost of living, but for our purposes, basically it's the cost of living. Now I want you to look at that red line, and that red line is the average pay rate for our warehouse workers around the country. And you can see in 2002, our average pay rate was $10.26. And basically, it didn't move for 12 years. It barely moved. And so in 2009 and 2010, I started warning companies that, look, this gap is not going to continue to widen. It's going to be fixed. It's going to be shrunk, and that's going to happen in one of two ways. Either the federal and the state governments are going to raise the minimum wage, and of course we see dozens of states that have done that and municipalities, or we'll see more labor unions. But this workforce is just not going to put up with falling farther and farther and farther and farther behind. So now let's fast forward from 2002 to 2014. There was been basically no movement in wages, but now there's this correction in the pay rates. And it's simply economics 101, guys. It is, there's more demand for labor and there's less supply of it. You saw that 3.5% unemployment, and there's hundreds of thousands of jobs available in the supply chain right now. So I want to point one other thing out. This is, we know that we're right in the middle of peak season right now, and there are many companies in the logistics, specifically e-fulfillment companies, who pay a peak season premium. And you can see those green squares there, and that represents where our average pay rate is for the month of December, and it's $1 higher than our average around the for the balance of the year, and we're right in the middle of that right now. So companies pay an extra $1 or $2 an hour to attract the workers they need just for that 10 or 12-week period, and then the average pay rate drops again in January. So let me talk a little bit about this survey that we do. I mentioned that we've been conducting the survey since 2007. And just to give you an idea that we survey hourly workers in the supply chain. So these are people that they could be in a manufacturing setting or could be in a logistics setting, but basically it's hourly workers in the supply chain. And we surveyed 18,500 of them. Put it in perspective, I remember our first year doing this in 2007, we only had 830 respondents, and now we're all the way up to 18,500 people. We think it's the largest survey of hourly workers of its kind. You can see the types of positions that we surveyed and the age and population of that group. These workers fell into one of three categories. They were our clients' full-time hourly associates. They were, at Prologistics, we're an industrial staffing company, and we staff thousands of, we have about 23,000 workers right now working in distribution centers around the country. So there's some of those associates, and it's also experienced applicants. And by experienced applicants, people who have worked in manufacturing or logistics. So we feel like we have a good representation of this hourly group. So the very first question we ask him is, what's most important to you when you're looking for a job? And you can see that blue line, pay rate, pay rate, pay rate, pay rate. Guys, there's nothing more important than a starting base pay rate to attract workers. Now, the Society of Human Resources does a great employee survey, and they rank pay as pay or compensation number 3 or number 4 in their surveys. And the reason that our survey is different from most employee surveys that you see is that most employee surveys capture people making 40 grand and 60,000 and $80,000 a year. You don't leave a $60,000 a year job for 63,000, but you leave a $12 an hour job for $13.50. So pay rate, you can have great culture and everything else, but if your pay rate's not competitive, these workers will go down the road. We talked a little bit about job security also as being really important. And job security doesn't only mean, do I have a job or don't I have a job? Job security can also mean, did my 40-hour-a-week job just become 28 hours a week because they canceled the shift, or I got sent home, 2 hours into the shift, they sent me home. And so those two things go hand in hand. Some things that have changed are things like how important benefits are, or how important advancement opportunities are to this workforce. And you'll see a purple triangle there, and that represents training opportunities. At ProLogistics, we have something we call a Better Work Life Academy, and we make courses, online courses, available through for all of our workers. And so we have 26,000 people signed up for online courses. It's amazing how popular these are. So that prompted me to ask people, how important are training opportunities? And they're more important than advancement opportunities. People want to know that this company, my employer, is going to invest in me and give me new skills. Next, we ask some basic questions like, what's most important to you when you're looking for a job? And you can see that 70%, we said, what shift do you prefer? And you can see that 70% of the population prefers first shift. Of course, that's no surprise to us, and we can see that 15 and 13% respectively prefer second and third shift. And only 2% of the population prefers weekends. We changed the verbiage of this question. For the first 10 years of the survey, we asked, which shift are you willing to work? 62% of the population is willing to work second and third shift, and 64% of the population is willing to work weekends. The reason we changed the verbiage in this question is that there are so many job opportunities out there. The last thing we want somebody to do is take a third shift job and then leave that job after just 2 days or 2 weeks because they found a first shift job that they really wanted. As a matter of fact, Mike mentioned in his portion of this presentation that the training time for inbound and outbound is somewhere between 4.5 and 5 weeks to get an employee to full productivity. So it's really important that we get people the shift that they want. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a second. We also asked about which shift structure do you prefer? And you can see that the most popular is 5 days a week, 8-hour shift, followed by 4 10s. But here's an important note. Only 14% of the population prefers 12-hour shifts. So that means if you think about this and apply that 14% to those 4 people that were left in the room, you really limit your opportunities for recruiting. So we went on and asked these associates, okay, we get it. You want a first shift job. Is there a shift differential that would get you to take a different shift and stay on that shift? We don't want you to take a second or third shift job and continue to look. We want you to stop looking. And so basically, a few years ago, a 50-cent shift differential was fine. Now, if your shift differential isn't $1 or more, it's not making any impact in your recruiting and retention of employees. So the big thing is that I would argue that on weekend shift, it's between $1.50 and $2 in order to get enough workers on those shifts. So next we asked, why did you stay with your employer the longest? And you can see the largest focus was that the company had a good company culture. And Kevin referred to the fact that, you have to engage employees, and that we have to, the way we treat people will help companies retain those workers. And I couldn't have said it better, Kevin. Well said. So the takeaway here is a good pay rate gets them in the door, and a good company culture will keep them in the door. So the next question is, this is a little scary. We say, hey, look, if you're currently employed, are you actively looking for a different job? Remember, these are hourly workers. And so 44% of the hourly workforce is not looking for a new job, but you have 26% of the hourly workforce actively looking for a new job, and 30% are passively looking for a new job. So over half of your hourly workforce is at risk of leaving you and going down the street. So we said, well, let's talk a little bit about some recommendations and some considerations. So you saw this big graphic before. You have to decide which group do you want to recruit from. If you're looking for great workers, guess where you have to recruit from? The working population. And so there's 153 million people who are working. Now, we also know that 56% of them are actively or passively seeking a different job. But a good, compelling reason to change is, first off, nobody's leaving a $12 an hour job for 13. They'll leave for 13.50 or 14, but people do not leave one company and go down the street for 25 cents an hour. You have to have a good schedule. You have to allow them to start earning some benefits immediately, like PTO, for instance. I strongly encourage companies to look at their reputation online and make sure that it gets managed properly. Because, you know, before you buy a toaster oven or a pair of shoes or a car, you go online and see what the reviews are. Well, guess what? Every potential employee is doing the same exact thing to your company. Sometimes, if it's for short term or or long-term projects, you can limit your recruiting pool to the unemployed people. But here's the deal, and you can see that in the third bullet down there. You're going to have to adjust your expectations. There are not many really great workers there. And so I encourage companies to look at their high school diploma requirements. You know, if you're on a receiving dock, is it important that you have a high school diploma if you're just unloading trucks or just building boxes? So I also ask people to take a hard look at their criminal background requirements. The US has 4.4% of the world's population, and we have 22% of the world's prisoners, inmates. It's hard for me to fathom that the people here in the US are 5 times worse than every other country. So, and then that final bullet is the transportation support. Many of these 5.8 million people, they don't have a car. And so we have to solve that transportation problem for them. And then finally, let's talk a little bit about the people that are not in the labor force. There's 40 million people who are over 16 years old and under 65 years old who are not working. And they're typically students or stay-at-home parents. The logistics industry is perfect for these folks. They can, you know, with Mike talked about some of the technology that's available. It's awesome that we can get people up to speed. They can, particularly these students, they're great with some of the digital technology that they'll need to embrace. And so the problem with this group is that they can't work 40 hours a week or don't want to. And so as employers, we need to provide flexible schedules. We need to have people that, you know, can drop the kids off at school, work for 5 hours, and then go pick them up. So it's up to us as employees to accommodate these people. And there's great workers there as part of that 40 million people. So finally, the recommendations are, the first thing you have to do as an employer is to review your pay rates and make appropriate adjustments. You never need to be in the top 20% of a payer in a market. You just can't be in the bottom 20%, because if you're in the bottom 20%, you are training workers for somebody else. The next thing, we talked briefly about a shift differential. Make sure that it's $1, because if it's less than $1, it's not having the impact you want. Finally, let's talk about modifying your attendance policy. At 3.5% unemployment, if you fire a lot of workers because of attendance, and many people do, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to replace those workers with somebody who just got fired by the company down the street for having attendance problems. So it's a big vicious cycle. Next thing, and Kevin hit on this very well, I thought, you've got to invest time and energy in the employees that are there, and great onboarding and employee engagement programs are critical. We just talked briefly about adding part-time shifts and flexible shifts. Terribly important, particularly during this peak season, for us to get through that. And then make sure people know that you're willing to invest in them and provide training opportunities to enhance their skills. And with that, I think we can send it back to Steve.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Brian. Very comprehensive, detailed content there. Anyone else alarmed by the fact that 56% of workers are either passively or actively looking for a new job at all times? A little scary, right? But as Brian pointed out, a lot of different levers that can be pulled to minimize that and to recruit and retain more effectively. So we've got just a couple of minutes for questions. We'll try to get to a few here, but we will circle back directly with any that have questions that didn't get answered. Question for you, Brian. Like I said, great stuff there. We've got a question. Are companies able to participate, have their employees participate in those surveys, and are they able to see the results of their employees?
Yes, as a matter of fact, they can. They just have to reach out to me. We'll make sure that we include them. I only showed about the replies to about 5 of the questions on this presentation, but I think we asked 24 specific questions. And if companies want their full-time employees to participate, it's free of charge. We'll send them the results of their specific company, and it'll give them a chance to compare those results of their company to the overall national results. The only thing that's required to do that is that we would need 50 participants in the survey. And that's so we can make it statistically accurate.
Understood. Thank you.
If we have 5 or 10 people participate in the survey, it's just not enough to be valid.
Mike, I think this one would be best for you. After scanning has been implemented, what errors are still being seen in packing and slipping? Or packing and shipping, I'm sorry.
Yep. So scanning is really being sort of the beginning of the cycle and moving into RFID to get away from those kind of errors. But typically what we see in scanning is that there's the topology of the barcodes may be picking up the wrong barcode if they're scanning multiple items. Or in the case of scanning is not being in the right application too, which oftentimes can be confusing. So the whole idea that we're seeing around scanning is how do you get more into a frictionless world where scanning is not so much direct, but it's more passive. So use of technologies like RFID are becoming very prevalent in this area.
Thank you. Kevin, I think this one may be best for you, but anyone can jump in. With all the talk of robots and automation in warehousing, can someone with a smaller budget compete?
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. It's interesting. I was in a automotive parts distributor recently that ships $1 billion a year out of their facility with no robots and literally no conveyors. All they had were, WMS, handheld computers, and people. And they've retained their people, which just blew my mind. Some of their people were there for over 20 years. They have literally no turnover. So you compare them to companies that have a lot of money to spend, and they try to solve that problem with automation, but it's a hit or miss. I mean, you can spend a ton of money on a DC. Nowadays, you're talking in New Jersey, it's $2 million an acre just to buy land. So by the time you get a distribution center up, it's hundreds of millions of dollars. And you put automation into it, it's a huge investment. Whereas, we take some of the stuff that Mike's offering and you talk about Brian, how we really get to know your people and then roll it all together with a great process. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and you can compete and literally ship $1 billion out of your facility.
Thank you. We had one that just came in, Brian. I think this would be right up your alley. We just implemented a shift differential for our second shift workers. It was 50 cents per hour. Do you suggest I talk to HR to raise this? I think your answer is going to be yes, based on what you said, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I would put the question back. If you've already implemented it, did it have the impact? I want you to walk through that, do the math in your mind. 50 cents an hour, working 40 hours, it's an extra $20 a week. Do you think somebody would change their lifestyle for an extra $20 a week? And the 18,500 people that we surveyed said, hell no. If it's not $1, I know that report showed $1.30 an hour, but in real terms, it has to be $1 in order to have it to make an impact.
Awesome. Thank you. So great stuff today. We will be sending out a brief survey to everyone that attended today. Every single person that fills out that survey will be guaranteed to receive a Google Play gift card. So please give us your feedback. Thank you to all of our great speakers today and to everyone that attended and contributed to our Q&A. Zebra and Newcastle have great solutions that can absolutely help drive efficiencies in your warehouse, and ProLogistics has phenomenal resources in making key decisions that will help you hire and maintain your labor talent. Thank you to all that attended, and thank you to our speakers today.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep, thank you.
Anything that we can be doing to help you facilitate these conversations further, MCAT and Barcodes Inc. is happy to do that. Thank you all. Have a great day.